Hello, this is Kyle, also known as AlienTude, and today I am taking a quick look at this LK Chen Royal Arsenal Handao. Now, this sword is one of a bunch of them that LK Chen sent to me as not review samples because they are loaners. These swords have been sent to a variety of people before me, and now they've made their way to me. However, they're pretty well used, and some of them are showing quite a bit of signs of that wear and use. So that's why I'm not doing full reviews of these swords. I'm just doing these kind of quick impressions videos and giving you an idea of what I think about them without doing the exhaustive reviews that I normally do. So this sword sells new from LK Chen for $265, and that does not include shipping. From LK Chen to me would be an additional $70 shipping. So you're looking at $335. If you wanted to buy it from Kult of Athena, it's a little bit less than $300, but then you have to account for tax and shipping from them. I put links to both of those in the description if you want to look at them. So with this sword, you also get a scabbard, which is pretty simple. It's a couple slabs of wood with a few, I'm not sure if these are brass or bronze. To me, they look a little bit more like bronze fittings on them, and they're pretty nice. It's pretty solidly constructed, but it's pretty light, and the fit is very good. There's absolutely no rattle here. If I hold it upside down and shake, it doesn't come out at all. So that's good. And with how easy it is to draw, I can easily see doing cuts straight out of the scabbard. And with how light everything is, I can easily imagine just holding onto the scabbard in one hand while doing cuts. And it doesn't really get in the way. You could even theoretically use this as a bit of a shield or even another weapon if that were your inclination. Now let's take a quick tour of the sword's features. So the hilt is very, very bare bones with two slabs of wood and then some cord wrapped around it. It features a ring pommel and an incredibly minimal bronze guard here. The cord wrap, these lines here are pretty loose, but nothing else is loose. I can't feel it move around. And when I swing the sword around, I don't notice any looseness in the cord wrap. So even though these are a little bit loose, I don't think that's actually a problem. I also think with this kind of ring pommel, it probably makes sense to get some kind of tassel and wrap it around your wrist. And for additional security, especially when you're doing thrusts or anything like that, you don't want your hand to ride up the sword and grab the blade. So a pretty tight cord here to wrap around your wrist would probably be advised. The bronze guard is very, very slightly loose. Again, not something I've noticed when using it, but when I put my finger against it, I can feel it move around just a little bit. Again, this is a very well-used sword. It's been shipped to a lot of people. Shipping is not particularly gentle on swords. So, this is not a new sword. This is not what you can expect out of a new sword. Taking a look at the blade, one of the things I really like about this is the very gentle recurve it has. It's got a very subtle look to it that I just really like. I like recurve blades. They have a really cool aesthetic that just appeals to me for some reason. It's also quite stout. Hopefully you can see how thick it is. But for such a short blade, that is a very thick spine, and it has a lot of distal taper out here. Now, because this is designed after a Bronze era design for a sword, the edge beveling here is kind of axe-like. It's a very short bevel from the start of the bevel to the edge, which means this is going to be more of a chopper than a slicer or cutter, because there's not a ton of space for the blade to get very thin, which is more conducive to cutting. Now, despite this being patterned after a Bronze era sword, this is made from steel, and it's made from LK Chen's typical pattern welded steel. And you can look right up here for the chemical composition of the steels that they use. This one, again, it's used, and There's a few black spots here and there, and a couple very minor chips in the edge from a good amount of use. Not something that I consider to be a problem. It would not take very much effort to smooth those out with a sanding belt. And speaking about the pattern for this sword and the Bronze Age and just the general history of this design, I'm going to throw this over to my friend who has a much better grasp of Chinese history and to give him a chance to explain.
Hello again, Kyle. Thanks for having me back on the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Washou Dao, the ring pommel Dao. This time the Royal Arsenal Dao from LK Chen. This is a slightly bigger version, but it's the one ring type that I have on hand. So where did this Dao come from, and what is it all about? So to trace the origin of these Dao, we have to try and figure out where they were used. In the Bronze Age, Dao weren't really military weapons. There's a couple different possible origins for this. I recommend checking out Scholar General. He has a great discussion on where these ring pommel Dao come from. One possible origin that we'll talk about this time is that they came from earlier, smaller utility knives. And by the time that these become military weapons, we do find them in a range that start from weapons much smaller than the Royal Arsenal Dao, that are kind of like big knife size, so a little bit larger than kitchen knives, all the way up to the kind of standard infantry weapon. The one we're going to be looking at is definitely the kind of soldiers models, but there's examples that we have found from tombs that are beautiful, extravagant pieces. They do start as bronze weapons, so we find the earliest examples that are made of cast bronze, and then they transition as, again, the Han Dynasty begins to industrialize and make weapons out of iron and steel, turn into steel weapons. This ring pommel, which is characteristic of it, is something that becomes recognizable as a feature of Dao and continues throughout all of Chinese history, all the way into the 20th century. You can still find ring pommel on Dao. Occasionally you see them on Jian, but not as commonly. So this is something that's featured with Dao. And again, this is the earliest type of Dao, and it really is where the beginning of single-edged weapons in China happened, and it's kind of the precursor, it's kind of where the origin story of single-edged weapons exist for almost all cultures. This is in some ways the birthplace of backswords and sabers start and kind of promulgate outward from, as far as the Steel Age is concerned. It's a complicated story. You can't say that every saber comes from this Dao, but it's, let's put it this way, a strong argument can be made that this is in some ways the birthplace of sabers. So did it start as the primary field weapon of the Han Dynasty? No. Coming out of the Warring States period and the unification under the Qin, they were using Jian. Much like this one, this is one of the kind of standard mid-Han, mid to late Han weapons. This is the White Arc from LK Chen. This would be a pretty common soldier's weapon. Maybe they would be slightly shorter than this, but like we saw previously in the Magnificent Chu Jian, the typical soldier's weapon coming out of the Bronze Age would have been a Jian with a shield. So you'd have something like this little gorang. You'd have a shield and a sword. Again, you could have other weapons as well, but this type of combination would be very common. However, starting in the maybe 2nd century BC, we start to see the introduction of these Dao come into play. And as the Han Dynasty continues, we see more and more and more Dao becoming prevalent. And so a transition happens perhaps in the middle of the Han. They were able to better equip huge armies, and part of that was being able to make everything standardized, and the Dao, the infantry Dao, is one of the things which is really well equipped for the type of warfare that was going on during the Han. It's a compact, short weapon. It's a little bit easier to make than a Jian, and the thing is, it's also more durable. It's got no frills about it. It's very durable. It's going to be very difficult for a soldier to accidentally damage. And as warfare continued to move forward, the shields moved from the gorang that I just showed you, the hook shield, to kind of larger style shields, which make it easier to get in closer. And this kind of long jian makes it a little bit more difficult, and it biases towards a kind of shorter weapon. What you effectively have is the beginnings of a Chinese gladius. So what you're seeing in the Royal Arsenal infantry Dao is the equivalent of what was happening at the same time in Europe with Rome. You have mass-produced weapons to equip a centralized army, and you have weapons that are replacing what were more bespoke, more weapons that were used for more individualistic combat, and that were harder, a little bit more expensive and more harder to produce. They were used in civilian settings as well, so we have evidence that they were carried around and used even off the battlefield. But it became clear that under the Han, this was really the weapon for the new age of doing warfare.
Thanks for that overview. For all my viewers, if you haven't checked out his channel yet, make sure you do so. He provides a really history-focused and scientific thought process approach to swords and videos, so check him out. Slith's sword weighs in at about 1 pound 4 ounces, and boy is that light. This feels like the perfect extension of your arm. It doesn't feel like it's even there hardly, except that you do feel it. You have blade presence out here. You can definitely feel it helping guide the cut a little bit, but it's light, it's nimble, it's easy to use. You can just move it around so quickly. It's very similar. It reminds me a lot of the Siamese Edge Da I reviewed recently, in that it's just so light and nimble and easy to move around. And I have good tip control with it. I can move it out there wherever I want to, and I can very easily start a cut and then change direction, do double cuts incredibly easy. Just keep doing those cuts. I don't know if you heard it there, but there's a good amount of sword wind. Tachikaze is the Japanese term for it. There's a good amount of that, so it does help you aid in the edge alignment by giving you that noise when your edge alignment is correct. In terms of how this sword cuts, I was actually pretty impressed by it. I got a few silent cuts with it, not a lot, but overall, it actually performs better than I expected for a sword that has an edge bevel design that isn't really designed for cutting lighter targets. Like I said before, it's much more of a chopper than it is really a slicer, but it actually cuts light targets quite well. And with how light and easy it is to move it around, you can do some pretty cool cuts with it. So this sword costs around $300 to $330 once you deal with shipping and tax, anything extra costs like that. Is it worth that price? Yeah, I think it is. It's got a lot of fun handling. It's a lot of fun to move around. It's a good backyard cutter, and it's a real looker in my opinion. I really love the way this sword looks. I could easily see this being an everyday carry type sword. It's light, it's small, it won't drag you down if you strap it to a belt, or if you get more modern and strap it to some kind of backpack system with MOLLE attachments and all that kind of thing. I think this could be a really worthy sword for that. I think this could be a worthy sword for a zombie apocalypse style. It's a beefy blade while still being light. The handle is very simple. If this started coming loose, it would not be that hard to rewrap with new cord. So overall, I think this is actually a lot of fun to move around, a lot of fun to cut with, and not that expensive. So yeah, I do think it's worth it, and I think it's worth it for a variety of purposes. And that's going to wrap up this not review. I want to say thank you to KK from LK Chen for sending me these swords, and another thank you to Dlatrex for sharing his expertise on the history and giving a different perspective on these swords. Until next time, Alien 2 out.